If you have questions as we go through the webinar, please enter them in the chat box. So we are leaving time towards the end of the seminar to take questions from people. If you want your question to be anonymous, then you can always just chat your question directly to me, Christine Ippolito, if you don't want everyone in the chat box to be able to see it. Although what we're finding generally is if you have a question, you're not alone in having that particular question. So I'm going to share a little bit about myself and Compass for those that are not as familiar with us. We're an award-winning human resource outsourcing firm. We're celebrating our 13th year in business, and our work is really focused around 4 key areas that make a difference in business profitability, scalability, business valuation. And so most of our clients are privately held family businesses. They're looking to grow the business and scale the business, either to be able to transition that business on as an asset to the next generation, or they're looking to position to sell the business. We're headquartered in Hauppauge, Long Island, and we have clients that are located in the tri-state area, but our work is national in scope because we handle our clients' needs wherever they may have operations. And this includes states as far away as California, Florida, Georgia, and closer states like Rhode Island and Connecticut. So one of the things Seema and I were talking about today is how excited we are not to be really talking about COVID. So I'm not going to share with you all the work that we did during COVID. What we are going to talk about today is the work that we are excited to be able to dive into. And one of the things that's been most empowering for us at Compass is our relationship with Predictive Index and PI and our ability to do behavioral-based assessments. So as we go through some of the challenges of 2022, I'll be kind of talking about how those tools can be beneficial and helpful. So Seema, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Okay, thanks. And I've had the pleasure of knowing Christine for almost the entire time I've had my firm. So my name is Seema Ali, and I am principal attorney of the Ali Law Group. And we're very focused, and pretty much our main area is labor and employment. And I personally have been in this field for over 25 years. I studied industrial and labor relations at Cornell. And even throughout my law career, including law school, I pretty much only focused on this area of law. So I'm very highly specialized in this area. And really our mission now is to provide, the utmost level of service in this area. And a lot of what we do now is about providing knowledge. And our tagline is KEYS, which is knowledge leads to empowerment, which yields success. And that to me is a major part of what I try to do for my clients. And part of this, what we're doing today and, dealing with clients is to help them understand the laws. And I think it's been, if we haven't seen why it's so important to understand them in the last 2 years, I think, somehow you missed the boat, because there have been an incredible amount of changes from a legislative perspective. And we have found it's incredibly important to keep clients abreast of the changes in the laws and helping them understand what they mean, and how it could potentially impact them. Now, we celebrated last year was 10 years of being in business. Been so great to be part of the community in Long Island. We have a lot of clients in the metro area, have received numerous awards, and you have a great team working with us. So happy. But one of the things, and Christine and I, like I said, we've known each other a long time. We've, our colleagues, we're friends. We naturally with what we do, things kind of work together. And I think what we said, and one of the reasons we wanted to kind of put this presentation together is because of so much that's gone on in the last 2 years, really, with COVID. We've really seen how important it is to have a good legal team and an HR team. So it's really important to have a legal team that can advise and guide and provide the knowledge on the legal updates, which are federal, state, and local laws and regulations. There's also court cases that come out, but also critically important is to have an HR team that can actually, that is also aware and that can help actually implement the legal guidance that you're getting. So, I think that sometimes sometimes you're aware, there's a lot of information that's out there on the internet, in the news and everything, but then the next step is actually, how does this apply to your company? And how do you make sure that you're actually doing what you need to do? And that you understand what the law means with respect to your company. So it's kind of like you need to have, that team in place and working hand in hand. So with a good legal and HR team that are able to work in tandem, your company is actually well suited to move beyond just compliance and actually develop strategies so you can be a thriving organization. And that's really what our goal is. Like, instead of just being stuck in the muck and moving maybe a little bit, we want our clients to really be at their best and successful. So that's kind of our goal in trying to work together. So what we really don't want to talk about COVID. We know it's out there. But what we want to talk about is, in the midst of all this and what we've seen from our perspectives, because both Christine and I really are experts at what we do. And so we kind of came up with key trends to talk about to help you think about how you can move your business and be continuing to be successful and to thrive. In this, it is sort of a newish environment. There's a lot of things to keep in mind and a lot of, moving parts. So that's kind of, that's really what the design is of this thing. The other thing that, we have kind of collaborated on, and I think this webinar will give you a little bit of a preview into why this is a great collaboration, is we've come up with a program where you kind of get the benefit of having both the legal updates and guidance, along with access to, an HR team that can help provide answers to some questions. So our firm, what we've done is we've come up with this program called At Work with ALG, and that is a subscription service. And as part of that program, you get access. We do about at least 2 webinars a month. We give more in-depth articles. You get access to a portal that has a library of all this data. So our hope with the webinars and with the service is that, giving the information to subscribers in multiple formats will help you make sure that you're aware of the current and most pertinent legal updates out there. And having access to Compass's team to be able to answer questions and maybe, help, answer any, questions, how it applies to your business, we hope will be a great way to, start building your legal and HR foundations. So we have a website that talks a little bit more about the program. And if you have any questions about that, you can reach out to either Christine and I afterwards. So we're going to get started. So one theme and something I think that has really come out, I think if anyone hasn't thought about it or talked about it or, heard about it in some form or fashion, is remote work. So the thought here, and, we're going to really give you perspectives from both an HR and a legal standpoint, but one major theme to think about is that remote work is something that whether or not it's part of your business, you do need to think about it in some way, because with the way everything transpired since 2020, it became part of the workplace at this point. People talk about it, that people think about it. There's like this option, there's all different kinds of perceptions. So if you just completely ignore it or don't contemplate how it impacts your workplace, you're missing the boat. So, you know, this is something we felt like this is the number one thing. You have to figure out how it does impact your workplace and, you know, how to move forward in this environment. So Christine, I'm going to take it on to you.
Sure. So, I mean, some key data and key themes is that, you know, if you're paying any attention to recruiting and job postings, you'll notice that there's a significant increase in jobs that are now available on a 100% remote basis. There's a lot of survey data that shows that employees are willing to take a 5 to 10% pay decrease or forfeit a merit increase in order to be able to continue to work remotely. 68% of companies plan to have some type of hybrid work teams moving forward. 46% of companies are adopting fully remote or hybrid work models. But remote work doesn't solve all problems, and it actually creates some new challenges and issues. So one of the things that we're seeing with remote work is sort of mental health and this sense of isolation. We really took for granted, right, just the natural interaction and connection with coworkers and colleagues, showing up at 8:30, 10 o'clock in the morning, making a cup of coffee, talking about what we watched on Netflix or, you know, 60 Minutes, and just that human connection of 10 or 15 minutes in the morning and probably throughout the day, 1 to 2 hours of casual human contact. With remote work, that is completely removed. So those casual conversations over water coolers, you know, the restroom conversations, the lunchroom conversations, remote work has removed that. So you have a lot of employees in the workforce that are extroverted, who are energized and thrive off of interaction with others. This is particularly challenging for them. People that are introverted may not sense it as much, but once they start to feel isolated, they're certainly going to have a much more challenging time reaching out and asking for help. It's not really in their nature to do that. They're internal, they're reflective. This also poses additional challenges with supervision and performance management. Again, sitting next to your supervisor or sitting next to teammates and being able to ask questions, having someone double check something on the fly. All of this has to be much more planned and intentional. And managers really, excuse me, need to have weekly or bi-weekly check-ins with their direct reports. So depending on the size of the team, this can be, you know, time consuming and needs to be planned and thought through. The other thing that we're seeing more and more is time to listen. Having the time to listen as a supervisor and just be empathetic and seeking to understand what is going on. People want to know that somebody at work cares about them. And managers don't need to be able to fix everything, but they need to know enough and be trained enough to be looking for the signs of isolation and fear and anxiety coming from employees and be able to alert HR or make referrals. Career growth and development. You know, this kind of goes back to the same theme. So a lot of us used to find out about projects just by having, you know, lunch with a coworker or a colleague, and they would share what they were working on. We would share what we were working on. Maybe there would be opportunities to collaborate. The biggest thing that we also notice is when you're onboarding new hires, just being around other existing employees and listening to the conversations, the terminology, the vernacular, the tone, and the culture. Again, all of these things must be much more planned out and much more intentional. We've also moved people around a lot. If you were a receptionist pre-pandemic, a lot of companies shifted your role. And now you're taking on additional tasks or responsibilities that might be more administrative, not as customer facing, or now you're doing things with smaller groups of people. Also, kind of the long-term impact on job duties and tasks. As much as we think we've all mastered Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google Meet, we've been doing this now for 20 months. But is there consistency in your organization? Does everyone have a consistent background, a consistent naming convention when they get on these tools? Can you tell your employees from customers on a Zoom meeting? So all these automation and improved technology, again, just leads to different challenges. But I think one of the biggest issues that comes up is there's some misconceptions about remote work. It's not the end all and be all. It's not an automatic fix to all the problems. And remote work can actually create more anxiety and more stress for employees, because it's harder to have that separation between when does work begin and when does work end? When does my day start? When does my day end? What is that transition time? I was talking to one of my colleagues, and we were, discussing how hard it is to go from Zoom to Zoom to Zoom. Where do you even have a break to go to the bathroom or to think? At least when we were traveling a bit more, you could like decompress in the car and just kind of zone out, collect your thoughts, and have a formal transition. A lot of those opportunities are now gone. So really creating rules around, if you're working remotely, when does work begin? When does it end? What are the expectations around being connected to your devices? When are we taking breaks? People have to take breaks. Maybe you need to create some split shifts for people that have caregiving responsibilities that might need more than a 30-minute or an hour lunch break. Maybe they need a 2-hour break in the middle of the day, but they're more than happy to take that 2 to 3 hour break and extend their day a little bit longer. The other area that kind of just jumped up on us as HR professionals was people moving out of state. So if you had a workforce that was all located in New York, and all of a sudden somebody wants to move to New Jersey to be closer to family, or to decide that they're going to, reside with someone else, or be closer to a significant other, right? We all kind of shifted where we spent our time during the pandemic. That automatically creates issues with benefits coverage. And it also creates some differences in, is there disability coverage in these other states? What about paid family leave or parental leave? What are the laws and guidelines? Have we ever registered to do business in this state? Are we withholding unemployment and taxes from the right entities? Do we really know where people are working from? Are their addresses current? So we've had to kind of adjust some of our policies to force employees to advise us when they've changed their work location. And that probably is a good transition into SEMA and all of the impacts that these types of things at remote work have on your policies and your procedures.
Yeah, great job, Christine. So I think, just thinking about it, just generally, is when you think about the laws, there's so many employment and labor laws at play. And, what you're trying to do from an HR and a legal perspective is to provide structure and a foundation to your business. And, for so long, you're operating on the assumption, you have the structure was created based on a schedule. You had a schedule when you're coming to work. You maybe came into an office right there. It's like, okay, 9 to 5, there's a specific place. And all these assumptions are built into, how you didn't have to explain it or put it out there. Now, what's happened with remote work, those assumptions are gone. You have, all the things that you assume or you kind of just take for granted are now kind of a little bit out the window. And people are writing their own rules, and people are deciding what's appropriate for them or when it's appropriate for them, because a lot of people have this option to work remotely, and they did. but then you didn't necessarily update or, take into account how this was going to play out. So a lot of the things that Christine mentioned, is some of the basics that you just need to think about, so when you think about someone's job, when you think about the way that you're structuring your company, you have to kind of reassess what your basic assumptions are. Where is the work being performed? What is, what are the expectations? Are there hours that someone is supposed to work? Or is it based on output? Is this even a remote work possible job? Do you want this job to be remote? When is somebody going to be able to work remote? Is it a fully remote? Is it hybrid? Is it, all these things? Now, we're going to talk a little bit more about how it plays out with accommodations, but these are considerations you want to think about. And you also want to think about it in a way that similarly situated people are, it's not just about a person, it's about the job. You want to look at it overall, do these jobs, can they be performed in a remote basis? Now, as I mentioned, part of the thing is even if people cannot work remotely, their job is in person, there is this allure because there's so much discussion about the idea that being remote is somehow better in some ways. So you also need to kind of get ahead of that and make sure that what you're doing why certain things are the way they are and kind of get ahead of that explanation. So number one is you want to make sure that your company's policies accurately reflect your current work operations and include some type of reference, even if it's not possible, to remote work. Because if there is specific situations when it occurs, then that needs to be spelled out. If it's not even contemplated, you still need to address it because it is sort of the elephant in the room at this point. You need to at least, have it be addressed. If you are going to have shifts, if you are going to include hybrid, you need to explain that, and that should be something that's reflected in a job description. I would highly recommend that you look at your organizational structure, look at your org charts, redo your organization charts, and see what areas of your business are able to be remote, if at all. And where it fits in the way your organizational operational flows work. A major consideration that you absolutely have to consider, have to put into policy and have to contemplate how it works is technology. Technology is the absolute critical component into making remote work even possible. So what technology are you using? What is going to be provided? Who is responsible for paying for it, and who's going to control it. The technology is really part of the walls. It's part of who your business is. If you are having employees using your technology, it's your stuff. So it should be and that should be part of your budgetary considerations if you are going to be having people work remote. Hand in hand with technology is also going to be security and privacy considerations, because now you have people, it used to be that the only way, again, the assumption is that you came into an office, you worked out a desktop or something like that. Now people are accessing your company information from various points. That includes their own, are they their home Wi-Fi? What is that? Because there's a lot of, leaks in that kind of place. There's privacy considerations depending on the nature of your business. Everybody, if you're doing any kind of e-commerce, if you're doing anything that includes people's, financial data, how are you securing that? What are your steps if you ever have a cybersecurity threat? Do you have any kind of cybersecurity insurance? So there is a lot to consider if you're building a remote work team or having people work remotely on a consistent basis, that you have to make sure on the back end that you have secured, because these things are not necessarily built in when someone is setting up a home office. So that's an investment I think the companies need to be able to take and on a consistent basis. Another area of law that is definitely going to be challenged, and there's going to be more and more, out there, but it is about wage and hour. So the basics with wage and hour is if you are considered non-exempt, which means you're not exempt from the overtime requirements of the Fair Labor Standards Act, then you have to be paid for, all hours worked, but you also have to be paid overtime for anything over 40 hours within a 7-day work period. That's on the federal basis. Some state laws have different considerations. I'm just talking federal law because I don't need to, otherwise we'll be here for the rest of the day. So that's just a basic premise, just so you understand. So the reason that's very important is now all of a sudden you have a lot of people working remotely, and you don't necessarily have systems or great systems in place to track hours of work. And, there is a general rule that talks about de minimis work. So again, I'm just giving you general considerations, but the premise is anything over 10 minutes is more than de minimis. So all these little Microsoft Teams messages, Zoom meetings, emails, you quickly get to 10 minutes. And all of a sudden now you have people who might be non-exempt who are working remotely and are not getting necessarily paid, and also might be eligible for overtime. So you really need to think about, again, who is going to be working remotely, if they're accessing this information outside of their normal hours, or if this is part of the expectation of their job. How are you tracking the time, and are you paying them for all hours worked? When someone's working on a salary basis and they're exempt from overtime, you don't have as much of these considerations. But in order to qualify for the exemption, they have to meet both a job duties test and a salary test, which is not as easy as it sounds, and people don't always get that correct. So it's critically important to make sure that you do meet both those tests, and you have pretty much the only thing that supports the exemption in terms of the job duties is really a job description. So that is a very important part of the remote work, world, is to make sure the job description for somebody who may or may not be working remotely is up to date and reflects exactly their work environment, their work location, and even to some extent, whether or not they have supervisory roles or who they report to. Okay. The next area, or the next trend that we think, I think blends right on in with remote work, is about flexibility and work-life balance. And I think this idea that, okay, remote work was actually going to be, allow people more flexibility. There has been an incredible mental health crisis in this country. And, because when you're working remotely, and I will say I have quite a bit of experience, because when I set up my law firm 10 years ago, my goal was to have a remote work office. And that was before it was even a thing. And it is challenging to, set boundaries and to have, when you're going to work and when you're going to deal with other things. And what happens is your whole day becomes about work, and you don't have time to, catch up and stop and decompress. And this whole thing is you're always on. And that is an extreme challenge. And it leads, people have been facing burnout. I think they're facing burnout because these issues related to COVID keep coming up and up and up. And, what we're also seeing is this great resignation. So many people are leaving jobs, and, they're not willing to deal with, bad managers, are not willing to deal with these long extended work hours and these unrealistic work expectations. So, what can you do as an organization? One of the things that you want to really focus on, how can you retain people, and what kind of benefits or what kind of workplace culture do you have to help with recruiting? Because those are going to be the things that you want. So one of those things is going to be, what are you doing to make sure that you have real, true, work-life balance? So Christine, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Sure. So one of the, with our partners at PI, we have a lot of access to surveys and data, and they recently published a survey where they surveyed over 2,000 employees in 50 different industries to try to really gain an understanding of what is causing these employees to quit. And this is the PI People Management Report. So one of the prime reasons that people are quitting is their managers are burned out. Managers are absolutely burnt out. I think it's probably a fairly safe assumption to say if you have managers, they're burned out. And I would imagine a lot of us on this call that are responsible for HR, operations, communications, we're also feeling some of these signs and symptoms of burnout. And so taking care of ourselves allows us to take care of others. 58% of employees with a burned out manager are considering quitting. So that emotion, those feelings, it definitely is viral and trickles down to the team. So professional athletes plan for recovery, right? So if you watch the Olympics, you are big into sports or the NBA or football, it's not how hard you play the game, and they don't play 50 hours a week. How are you recovering? And so this kind of a framework makes a lot of sense to me. For those of you that know me, I love endurance events and I do crazy things to push myself. But one of the things that you realize is at the end of that event, you have this great opportunity to leverage the strength, the wisdom, and what you just put your body and your mind through. But recovery is key. So how do we do that? Well, we take some time off, right? There's a lot of people during the pandemic that are not using their personal time or their vacation time. I think, again, they feel that concern that if I step away, if I take time away, my manager might not feel that I'm working. So there's a lot of people with huge PTO balances. And oftentimes 2 weeks is not enough. If you haven't been connected to friends and family in your support system, 2 weeks is not enough over the course of 12 months to catch up. So how do you create some other space? What can we do at work to remove the fear of failure, right? So failure causes stress, causes anxiety, and we get into that spiral of energy. What are we doing to kind of like gas up and refuel the energy tanks of our employees? Now, this can be slightly different for everyone. It's not the same, but there's some specific techniques that you can use, right? So for your introverts, time and space to think. Everything that we're doing right now, Seema talked about, we're constantly on this high level of productivity, the focus, the ever-changing information that we're listening to, this need to accomplish, to achieve. We need some downtime. And sometimes at work, that downtime is just space and time to think. This was really powerful. At something that I realized is I wasn't creating space or time for myself to think, to reflect, and to problem solve. And you can't problem solve and you can't be your most creative when you don't have that space to think and reflect. Maybe you want to think about creating meeting-free days, meeting-free Fridays. There's no meetings, there's no Zooms. We all just have a little bit more time and space to think. Setting boundaries and specific office hours. Again, we talked about how remote work can blend everything together. But I think one of the most powerful things you can do is ask people what would be helpful for them instead of investing a lot of time, effort, and energy into creating programs and policies. Asking people and getting them involved in creating some of these solutions by using surveys or stay interviews and engaging your workforce in kind of the dialogue or the changes that they would find helpful. And a lot of times people are asking for really small things that are totally doable and not expensive. I think the other thing that we're seeing is especially as an HR team at Compass, The past 20 months have been some where we've really witnessed more pain, fear, judgment, verbal attacks from employees to other employees, and kind of recognizing these are signs of stress and burnout, and oftentimes a cry for help. Making sure that your HR team and your managers kind of recognize this and understand it, and that they don't respond in meaning, instead of escalating it, de-escalate it. See if you can be compassionate, concerned, looking to understand when you're responding to those things. We've talked about work-life balance a little bit already, and policies and procedures, encouraging breaks, lunch breaks, coffee breaks. One of the things that we set up on our team early on in the pandemic is we all took a break at the same time. So we all knew every day from 12:30 to 1 o'clock, we were all on break. So we all knew no one's going to bother me. We can turn our phones off for that 30 minutes. It's okay for us to take a pause, do what we need to do, and then come back and at least have that time dedicated where we all knew where the other folks are, and we were having sort of like this shared experience. Maybe you want to build in some time to do something fun. Maybe people should be allowed, an hour a month to learn how to knit or crochet or take a cooking class or do some yoga. So just kind of looking for those things and building out your wellness initiatives. Not everyone has a lot of money, but New York City has the Thrive program. Again, a little bit controversial about where all the money's going, but it's there. Leverage it, distribute those materials, get the materials out about the New York Hope program and the New York City Thrive program. Make it okay to ask for help. Have your managers talking about it, because it really is a sign of strength to know when we all need a little bit of help as human beings. The more you can demonstrate that you actually care about your employees, the more you can kind of diffuse that fear and anxiety and tension that's happening. And that will have a direct impact on people kind of rethinking, is this a place that I want to be, that people care about me, or should I really be looking for some place to move on to? So Seema, you can talk about sort of the legal ramifications of, implementing all of this in the workforce.
Okay. Yeah, and we're a little bit, we got a little, I'm going to try to move along a little bit, and maybe I'll get to some of the other themes too, because we're a little bit behind the time. But just to go off of what Christine said again with the policies, and if you are thinking about how remote work is great, or having what kind of hours are we talking about, and what are the real expectations? I think really thinking about a workday, making sure you build in time and making it okay for people to take a break, to have meal breaks. Where they're not going to be, looked at as something bad. There's this whole idea that every hour needs to be scheduled, or that if someone's working remotely, they're not working. But if someone's on a meeting, boom, 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 you got a Zoom meeting, a Teams meeting, this meeting, and your entire calendar is booked. You can't keep up with that pace. And when are you actually doing work? And allowing people time to actually be productive and do that kind of, thinking work. So really thinking about, when that occurs, if you are planning meetings, how do meetings flow? But really in terms of your policies, you want to make sure that, breaks are contemplated. Also, again, what is work? Access to the cell phones, the emails, and the messaging, that's constant, so like, the mental health drain, of getting these constant messages is real. And, does that turn off at a certain point? Is there a time when that's like, so people can have the time to decompress and all of that. So who is getting access to technology and at what times, and what are the real expectations? Are you texting someone at 6 a.m. and at 8 p.m. or is there is there a time when they really need to be available and on their devices? This should also be part of someone's job description, is the expectations and the hours. of when they're supposed to be working. And, you know, I think another big thing here is that we're talking about is, you know, part of being a manager. So sometimes, you know, people are supervisors and they're also managers of people. But what we're really seeing is people are not leaving their jobs, they're leaving their managers. And what's been happening is, you know, being a manager in this environment people haven't necessarily gotten up to the level of what that means. How to manage people on a different basis, where you have people in multiple states and multiple locations. You know, you still have a lot of responsibilities for your job, but you're also managing people and trying to inspire them and make sure they're doing a good job, and you're being measured on their performance. And that, I think you have to sort of update and figure out those skill sets. I'm just going to jump to the legal part really quick, Christine, and then you could talk a little bit, because I just want to make sure I hit some of the key points here. The biggest thing I see, and you know, because what we're seeing is a lot of people are leaving. So one of the biggest risks of litigation is when someone leaves a job. You know, when there's a termination or a resignation or anything like that, you have a major situation where you're dealing with a potential legal risk. So what you want to make sure is, when you're dealing with these situations where people are potentially leaving, is you want to really avoid, you know, potential claims of harassment or discrimination. And that's like a key factor in, you know, like when you're thinking about how people are being disciplined, or how their managers are reacting. So when you got people who are really stressed out or really, you know, burnt out, they might react in a different way. And so you have to kind of get ahead of that. And the big thing too, a manager or a supervisor has certain liability to the company that could put the company also at risk, because of their status as a manager or a supervisor. And they should also be aware of what they're doing in terms of their liability to the company, and how they could be impacting, you know, the potential legal risk. So I think they have to be aware of the laws that are at play, and how their actions might be, you know, putting the company at risk. A major issue now is going to be about safety and health. And a lot of managers are going to be responsible, and that's going to be part of their job. So I think it's got to be reflected in their job descriptions. And a critical part to kind of like mitigating risks for managers is making sure they understand what effective discipline is, and how to do performance management in a way that is not going to put the company at risk from a legal perspective. So the best way is to really look at the job descriptions, make sure that they're focused on the jobs and the tasks, and, you know, making sure people are on task and, you know, living up to their expectations, and not hurting, you know, disciplining people based on anything on an individual basis. Okay. You could talk a little bit about the HR piece on that one.
Sure. So I mean, this definitely kind of like ties back into what we were talking about with manager burnout. So with the PI survey and the study, the people management report, there's really two key skills that employees value most from their manager, and that's confidence. Okay. Employees are looking to their manager for a sense of certainty, a sense of stability, someone that they can rely on and go to. But the second most important skill, and the skill that employees feel is lacking the most, is communication. So a manager's ability to communicate effectively, to meet people where they are, that's really critical. And again, having the sense of connectedness at work, somebody cares about me. So what we saw in the pandemic was any type of training or development for managers and supervisors was pretty much abandoned. Clients are just starting to come back to that now, and to make the time and space to be able to do it. But it's super critical. You re-energize people, you refuel people, and people that feel like their manager is equipped to help them through change definitely are much more likely to stay and feel like their company cares about them and they're willing to invest and continue on. So the importance of managers cannot be stressed enough, and making investments here will trickle across your entire employee population. So I think, Seema, we should move on to accommodations.
Okay.
That's been a big topic as well.
So the thing is that this is something we've definitely seen accommodations in various forms throughout the pandemic, and it's going to continue. And I think at this point, one of the biggest lessons I can say that people should have learned is to plan for disruptions. And these type of requests are going to come up, and how can you plan ahead for them? So I'll just do mine quick because then you can talk about yours. But basically, there's various laws that are at play that provide for some level of accommodation. You're going to have laws related to safety and health, vaccine leave, COVID leave, things like that. There's the Family Medical Leave Act, which is a federal law that covers employers that have over 50 employees within a 75-mile radius. You have the New York State paid family leave. There's pregnancy accommodations. And then one of the biggest ones is going to be ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. We've also seen, accommodations related to vaccine mandates on a religious and medical basis that you have to think about. And what all these have in common is that, there is a requirement when you're dealing with an accommodation situation to engage in a dialogue and to determine what is a critical or essential component of the job, or what is the actual task that they need an accommodation from, and then on what basis they're requesting the accommodation, and what is the accommodation that they're requesting. And then at that point, you as an employer need to decide if it's an undue burden or you can accommodate this request. And what you're looking for is some sort of documentation or support as for the basis of the accommodation, and for some sort of guidance as to why that accommodation is necessary, and how it makes sense for them to have that accommodation and be able to continue to do that essential function. So, some examples are, a lot of people, and that's why this remote work is very important. A lot of people say, well, I can work on a remote basis and still do my job. So that's something that is going to definitely come up. We've seen it come up already multiple times, and that's where you need to sort of get ahead of it. So that's just, like the general fabric, but what you really want to have in place are the processes to deal with these situations, so that it's not like, ooh, I got an accommodation request, what do I do now? You need to be ready, and you need to be able to deal with it in a timely way. So you need to have the documentation, you need to have a form, an accommodation form, possibly a HIPAA release to be able to get medical support if someone has a medical reason. And then you need to be able to have some sort of form or document as to, what the accommodation request was, what your response was, because these are all things you want to make sure you keep on file to prevent or put yourself in a good position should anything go towards litigation.
So, Seema talked about the importance of process, having a process in place, but also knowing who needs to be involved. So a lot of times, it's super critical to have some feedback from the direct supervisor, even though, they may not need to know the exact medical condition or what's going on, but really making sure that you're involving that supervisor in understanding the role and the job and how this may impact the team. Be prepared to provide some additional resources or structure to the team. You might have to rearrange who's doing how much work. So we are seeing a tremendous amount of accommodations, but then what we also see on the flip side of that is the remaining team is having to work a little bit more or do a little bit more. So just be mindful. What does that look like? How can that be balanced? What support and resources do they need in order to be able to be successful and not feel like they're being dumped on? So again, like we keep going back to job description, job description, job description. Your job descriptions really help you to understand who's capable and responsible for knowing how to do different things and different tasks, and what's the frequency of that task, and do they have the space and time to be able to help out or jump in. So that's really all I have there on accommodation, Seema.
Yeah, no problem. So, you know, another theme or a key trend that we're seeing is about recruitment and selection. So, you know, I think it's been, you know, it still continues to be a problem. There's extreme labor shortages. People can't find people to work. I mean, you go to places and there are signs that, you know, staffing is a problem, expect less. We already talked about the Great Resignation. So, you know, and as I mentioned, it's when people leave and you, that's your biggest point of like legal risk. So, you know, yes, you're sort of faced with two things. You know, you've got to worry about, okay, yes, we need to recruit. Obviously, there's things you have to think about legally, but the selection process, and I think Christine is going to be able to talk more about that, but it's very key because your idea is you want to not only recruit, but retain, and you want to be able to build good teams, because that's going to really help you, again, be a thriving organization, and instead of just like filling a box. And that's what you want to, you know, so it may take a little time and there may be a bit more of an investment on the upfront, but it saves you so much more in terms of costs that are related to turnover, potential legal risks, and all of that, that are far greater than whatever investment you would spend on doing recruitment in possibly a more creative and novel way, and also investing in some other, you know, ways and different, you know, more up-to-date ways in looking at how your team is composed to help avoid potential problems, you know, in the future. So I'll leave it to Christine, because this is definitely her area of expertise.
Thanks, Seema. I mean, we're doing a lot of recruiting right now for our clients. You know, there's survey data that shows about 73% of companies are hiring. And with every crisis comes opportunity, right? If people are leaving their jobs and you're a great place to work, this may be an opportunity for you to leverage employee referrals, networking, in order to be able to attract some really great people that maybe wouldn't have moved before. So it's really important to understand that in the recruitment and selection process, companies are being interviewed as much as the company is interviewing the employee. And one of the things that's really come out across all generations in the workforce is this desire for meaningful work and purpose, and work that adds value to the community, to society as a whole, something that people can connect with. And meaningful work is very elusive. There's a lot of studies about it. It's definitely not an initiative or a project that HR is going to roll out, because it has different meanings for different people. But meaningful work definitely reduces stress. It creates a source of identity, belonging, and purpose. It has to be organic to your workplace. So there's really 4 elements of meaningful work that you should be able to leverage and make sure that you're building in these communications and this space to talk about these things in the recruitment and the selection process. What's your core business? What do you do? So when we talk to candidates, are we talking about the solution that our business provides, our customer, who we serve, the values of our organization and the objectives of our organization, or are we just talking about their job? So we have a client that actually Seema and I work on. And the day-to-day work could be really, really humdrum. People are moving furniture around. Basically, they're putting furniture on trucks, they're wrapping furniture, pictures, lights, pieces of sets. But the fascinating and purposeful part of it is, where does that furniture go and what are they contributing to? So this client does the sets for Saturday Night Live. This client does the sets for some really interesting movies and TV shows. And we've been recruiting warehouse employees for them. And when you can talk to the warehouse employee about, you're not just moving furniture, but you're putting the set together for Saturday Night Live. You're putting the set together for this Netflix movie, this opportunity, this TV show. That's a much more exciting conversation and connectedness for them than going back and saying, hey, I just got a new warehouse job moving furniture. Because they're going home and saying, hey, I'm involved in putting the set together for Saturday Night Live, right? So what is the story? What is the why? Are you sharing it? What is the broader sense of the job and how does it impact the world? And again, even if the job itself is small and tedious, who are they helping? What are they doing? You know, one of the things that we do here at Compass that's really pretty tedious is resume review. And we review hundreds of resumes a week. But what is that purpose? So the purpose is we're helping those candidates and the employer connect and find the right job for them. That is the purpose. We're creating and building teams. So while you may be the person on the team that's just reviewing resume, that's an absolute critical step in the selection process, and it's key. People are looking for supportive relationships at work. Again, this just goes back to somebody cares about me and who I am as a person and my contribution. So again, the 4 core elements that everyone can connect to in order to create meaning at work. Core business values and objectives. Share these, talk about these. The purpose that the job role plays in the broader sense for your company, your community, or the world. An understanding of why the little tasks matter. How do they contribute to the outcome, to the end game? How do they help other people? And are we creating time and space for those supported, connected relationships at work? So build these into the selection process. You probably also want to talk about what are the growth opportunities, the things that they're going to learn or be exposed to. Think about, does every job have to be full-time? There's several million people that have exited the workforce and there's not consistent agreement as to why. But we kind of know that these people are probably caregivers or retirees that just said the stress level's too high for me, I don't want to do this. So can we take a full-time job and make it 2 part-time jobs? Does everybody have to start at 9 o'clock, or could people start at 11? And end a little bit later, or work a shorter workday? How can we create flexibility to allow people to do what they want to do and have work-life balance, but also make sure that we're not losing that talent pool? The other critical factor is a realistic job preview. The candidate should be fully informed and not surprised about what the job and the role and the team is going to be like. We often see such a disconnect when our clients are not willing to take time in the selection process to expose people to this realistic job preview. And we see employees walking out like at lunch on day 1, at the 2nd week, or saying, you know, there's not enough training here for me. I thought my skills were stronger. I'm not comfortable staying on. So make sure that those are things that are being talked about. So, you know, in having predictive index as a tool and understanding behavioral profiles, you can also look at, does that person's natural behaviors align with the behaviors required to do the job? Is it a good fit for them? So we're not just talking about knowledge, skills, and abilities, but we're talking about behaviors, how they communicate, their sense of urgency, their attention to detail. How much structure do they need in order to feel comfortable and confident in performing the work? So matching people up in really strong ways. And once you know those things, your manager has a better guide for supervision, and you have a better guide for onboarding and team assimilation. So just like Stephen talked about, sometimes we're not spending money in the right place. We're spending a lot of money on turnover, a lot of money on job ads, but we're not really investing in the process to create a better outcome. And that's really the most critical thing you can do. The biggest impact on your workforce is who is on your team, who just walked into the organization, because their energy, their enthusiasm, their skills, that's going to spread, or their negativity, right? Their bad attitude, or that's going to spread. So what are you adding? And are people excited about them coming? So those are super critical right now.
Okay. Thanks, Christine. And, you know, one thing I think, and you know, I'll talk about this a little bit at the very end, but, you know, again, the recruiting is the first entry to your workplace. And I think, you know, with the pandemic, everything got shaken up. So like, this is maybe your time to, you know, like do a reset, you know, like some people do a cleanse. This is maybe like your time to do a cleanse and think about, you know, what is critical to your organization. Maybe you need to just look at it from a different perspective. I think that's what Christine is saying. So, you know, who do you want and what are you looking for and all those things. And that should just be reflected in the documents that are surrounded or related to recruiting, which include, you know, you have your job description, which is your job ad. You know, what is your new hire documentation? Do you have offer letters? Do you have, you know, all your onboarding documents together? And what's your process? Again, your process is so critical. You know, if you are going to be doing recruiting and you want to bring people on, are you ready? And do you have that process in place? And if you want to be a company that's at the forefront, you should be utilizing technology for this, because we have moved into a place where technology is part of, you know, the HR space. And are you seen that way? Because if you want to attract certain people and, you know, they want to know that you're up to date. So are you ready for that? Another important part is, you know, have you thought about what your vaccination requirements? Are you going to be requiring vaccines? Is it something that's critical to, you know, your workplace? And how is that playing out? Are you, you know, and what is your process around that? There are, you know, the basic laws in terms of hiring are going to be really, you know, your I-9, so the Immigration Reform and Control Act, you know, Title VII, which is anything related to discrimination. There's also laws related to background checks. So, you know, criminal background checks, fair credit background checks. But these are all things that you can have a process around. You should have forms in place, and there should be, you know, there should be steps that you're taking, and you should be ready for that so that you can go through it, be efficient, and, you know, get people into your organization. And again, it sets the tone. What is your workplace culture? What are you about? That should be clear in the whole, you know, recruiting and onboarding process. And you want it to be consistent across the board. So some things, I mean, I think, you know, we might've mentioned job descriptions about 50 times during this presentation, but I think that is an extremely critical thing to look at. And I would say, you know, overall, if you do have a moment, I know no one seems to have a moment these days. Everyone's on like, you know, everyone's running on fumes. I mean, including me and Christine, we both say it. It's just, we're exhausted. We're exhausted. But I think finding that time and space to figure out, okay, what is your current work environment? What is your current workplace, your workplace culture, and making sure that from a high level that your organizational structure, your organizational policies are reflective of your current work environment are going to be really, really critical, because that, and maybe part of your work environment is to encourage flexibility, is to encourage, you know, some change. And you want to make sure that everything is sort of updated and adapted. And, you know, we're kind of putting in place and putting in front of you these trends that we see that have been, you know, kind of percolating and, you know, throughout the last 2 years, but these are definitely going to be trends that are important and part of HR. So being aware of them and being able to plan, you know, planning is critical to being successful. And, you know, part of being successful and, you know, where you can definitely fall short is there has been a tremendous amount of activity from a legislative perspective and even just, you know, from court cases. And it is critically important to stay aware of them and be in compliance, because you can be doing all this work. And if you take a misstep there, it can lead to, you know, not just legal, you know, kind of cases, but getting audited and having fines and penalties, which you weren't necessarily planning for. And you don't want that to be something that, you know, eradicates your HR budget when you could be spending it on things like recruiting, you know, doing some sort of surveys, doing, you know, really important training and development of your team, which are great investment tools to do now, which, you know, help in terms of retention and all. So, one thing we wanted to say is we, you know, in addition to this PowerPoint and everything that we put together, you know, my team has put together a pretty comprehensive legal overview of updates. And if you do sign up for the At Work with ALG and Compass service, by the end of the month, we will give you that as a bonus for anyone who signs up for that. So that's exciting. And if you have any questions or, you know, about any of the things we talked about, Christine and I are here for a little bit longer, but our contact information is on this slide. And Christine, are you sending out this PowerPoint to people afterwards? I'm not.
Yeah, sure. We will. We'll send out the PowerPoint presentation and a link to the recording.
Okay, so hopefully everybody found this helpful. Thank you, Christine, for, you know, setting it up and hosting. And, you know, I wish everybody good luck. I really hope that we're moving forward and we're, you know, being productive and everyone finds a little bit of joy and energy in their lives. And, you know, we like the one word that we don't talk about the C word anymore. So, oh, there's a couple. Let me.
I think people are just saying thank you. I'm kind of watching it. Yeah.
All right.
I'll just double check it. Yeah. But I mean, feel free to reach out to either Seema or myself directly. We hope we gave you a sense of what it's like to partner with us and how we sort of like tag team and complement each other's strengths and abilities to really, you know, the goal is create a place where people can thrive, not just show up. And that's kind of what makes our purpose and what makes this exciting and meaningful for us. So thank you so much for being with us today. Have a great rest of your week and take some time to just think.
All right. Thanks, Christine.
Bye-bye.
Bye.